bad.
¿Cómo estás? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Vance, also known as Ricky Vance, and a great episode for you today. Somebody from one of my favorite alternative media websites, The Last American Vagabond, Ryan, the founder, creator of The Last American Vagabond. Whitney Webb now writes for The Last American Vagabond, and so does Derek Bros, who was just recently on. So I highly recommend you guys checking out his show on YouTube. Check out his show on any podcast app you use. His show is available on Podcast Addict. That's what I use on Android, but it's also available Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, all those places. So you can either visually see the show like mine on YouTube, or if you just want to listen to it, you can do that too. And I highly recommend it. Great source of news, alternative media, and like we discuss on today's show, one thing I love about Ryan is that he doesn't pick teams. He just tries to look at things as down the middle as possible. He doesn't make everything a black or white issue, and I'm not referring to race. I'm referring to how in many cases people act like there's only two sides to every perspective, and I really appreciate that. So we had a really, really fun discussion, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. Remember to subscribe to me on YouTube, RV Theory 6. You can follow me on Instagram, RV Theory 6, Twitter, RV Theory 6. You can find me on Facebook. The Ripple Effect Podcast has its own page. My music solo project, Theory 6. That's the number 6, the word theory, then the number 6. That's also has its own page. But you can find my personal page, Ricardo Verandas or Ricky Verandas. You can find my either one of those names. I think you'll be able to find me. And if you're a listener to the show, you want to connect on Facebook, please do. Just send me a little message. Let me know you're listening to the show so I don't think you're spam, and we'll be good to go. So thanks, everybody who's been supporting the show financially on Patreon. I truly, truly appreciate it. Unfortunately, I'm still very far from ever doing this full-time, and work has gotten in the way a little bit and it's picking up. So unfortunately, there's been a little bit of a hiatus since the last show and this show, but I'm doing my best to find time to schedule guests and get everything going and keep pumping out these shows, because I know when the coronavirus thing really popped off and I was putting out 2 shows a week, sometimes 3 shows a week, you guys were really enjoying it. I was getting a lot of positive feedback. So the goal is one day to do this full time and be able to do that much content. But for the time being, I will keep putting out as much content as I can. And if you can't support the show financially, of course, share the show, tweet the show, review the show, all that stuff really, really helps. It helps with just, to be honest, I'm going to be bullshitting if I'm telling you why or how it helps, because I'm not sure exactly how it helps, and I'm sure those algorithms are being manipulated, but it definitely can't hurt. And so definitely review and share the show and thumbs up and all that stuff if you can. And I'll keep this short because it's a long podcast, and I do a lot of ranting on the show. It's amazing because just last week I didn't put out a show, and I was trying to find time to put out a solo show. I've only did one Ricky Rants podcast, and I was trying to do another solo show, and I recorded it, and I hated it, and I didn't post it, and I'm just like, wow, man, I don't know if I could do a bunch of solo shows, and then I have a guest on, and I don't shut the fuck up. So it's it is one of those, I guess, incredible things about having a conversation with somebody. You can feed off one another, and sometimes you get energy or the conversation sparks a idea or something that gets you going. And when you're doing shows by yourself, much harder to do that. So, but anyways, thanks again, guys. Anywhere you can get my stuff, like I said, you can get Ryan's stuff, The Last American Vagabond. Support his stuff, support my stuff. Hopefully everybody's safe, everybody's sane, and hopefully this will be one of those logical discussions right down the middle that's not trying to force a agenda down your throat or force you to pick a team that everybody needs. These type of conversations are what I think everybody needs right now. So thanks, and see you on the next one. Peace. That works for you?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Sorry about the delay.
Okay. I'm at this point. I'm like, it's probably because of me.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the censorship is a issue. Actually, that's something I want to talk to you about too, because we did a swap cast not too long ago. I love just doing swap casts. I get a bunch of people from alternative media and just have them on. I mean, people that you're familiar with. I've had Jeffrey Wilson from the Conspiracy Farm, Charlie Robinson, Sam Tripoli, a bunch of people together and stuff. In this last swapcast we did, we talked about how, and it's funny because Midnight Mike from the Our Big Dumb Mouth show, he used the term, we're like the union of the unwanted, and we really like that term. And we were talking about, because he's really, really tech savvy in regards to understanding websites and algorithms and designing this stuff. And we were talking about how now with the Joe Rogan thing, him going to Spotify, how it was a good thing. It's a good thing because it showed that he probably publicly didn't say it, but he's probably sick of the censorship. He's sick of just the guidelines, and that's one of the reasons why he stopped doing live shows not too long ago, was because of the fact that he was constantly having issues with copyright things or being flagged because they played a clip or a song or whatever. And now that there's a competition, Spotify hopefully will do the opposite and not censor stuff, or at least not censor as much, and then people have a alternative, which hopefully in results YouTube might say, hey, we're going to be a little bit more flexible. We're not going to harass people as much, because now they have alternative to another platform if they want to go over there. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a good thing. But we were also talking about possibly, because the thing is about all these websites, right? Like, you have a great website. I've had Derek Bros on actually not too long ago, and Whitney Webb's been on a bunch of times. If people who are listening, and if they heard those past episodes, you can find their work on Ryan's website, The Last American Vagabond. And the thing is, like, we go to your website, we go to James Corbett's website, we go to, now London Real has very much been going against the grain, and they've really stepped up in regards to having controversial people on their show and fighting back when there is censorship. But it does become a hassle a little bit of like going from one website to another website to another website, and we're talking about getting a bunch of people from alternative media together, because the thing is about BitChute and some of D Live and some of these other websites, there's issues with just about all of them. I mean, even Sam Tripoli has his own platform. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called Broken Simulation. Yeah. And I started uploading some stuff on there or whatnot. But, people like easy. It's like it's all about, the path of least resistance. It's all about like, okay, what's the easiest thing to use? And that, that's one of the reasons why I believe iPhones have gotten, one of the reasons why they've gotten so popular, because it's easy, it's user friendly. It's one of those things where it's just there's not a whole lot of difficulty in learning it. And we're talking about getting a bunch of people together into alternative media and then brainstorming, like, what the fuck do we do? Can we create a website where we all agree that, hey, we're going to have open source or maybe just uncensored, people can go on there, whatever, and maybe filter out some things, have some type of guidelines in regards to like violence. I mean, basically do what we were hoping YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook and everybody did. Like, if you were promoting violence or something was just like all out, just horrendous, that everybody can agree on, regardless of political party or ideology or whatnot, then yeah, filter that out. I get that. But when it's obvious that you're filtering stuff out and you're censoring stuff based on political agenda or other agendas, Big Pharma's agenda, which obviously has a huge hand in that or whatnot, it's an issue. And I guess for people who are listening, you do have one of these many good alternative websites and media sites that I use that people hopefully will check out. But let us know, how did you get involved in this, and then your opinions on the future of alternative media, and if something like that is something we should get together and do.
Absolutely. And first off, I want to just say I apologize. I forgot that the recording started when you called me, and I'm like, oh wait, I just said that on the air. So I apologize about that. The timing in the beginning. I'm happy to be here.
I can cut that out. It's all right. It's not live.
Okay, great. Well, so it's it's a very interesting time that we're in, and the note of the censorship aspect is such an important key issue in all of this. And for me, it's a really hard, even for those of us that are adamant about complete free speech. It's a really difficult situation because, if we're really going to break it down and we want to say, at the end of the day, real free speech means people can say whatever they want, right? And that at the end of the day, you have the right to not look at it or to call it gross and disgusting and say that person is a bad human being, right? But at the end of the day, they should have the right to say it. But that's a hard thing for people today. Right? There's a line, right? What about if they're calling for violence for somebody, right? And it says there shouldn't, the idea that we need to accept the reality that we either want free speech or we don't. There's not a line there, and it's like we have to accept that, and that will come with some problems, some violence, some negativity. That never goes away. That's the illusion. The government doesn't take that away. I argue they just simply add another layer of problems and danger and violence, But in regard to me and how I got into this, it's a really, it all started for me with a big cannabis, for the most part, that opened my mind to, I think we all kind of had that moment and, all seeing that, man, they're really lying about what this plant is and what it's done and what it can do and on. And that's kind of where it started for me, and it just kind of blew up into this mental revolution for me where I realized that there's so much more of that in every aspect of life, and just kind of started to try to wake people up doing what I'm doing now,
Get into smoking it? Did you, or just you picked up on the lie of?
The content. Yeah, I've smoked on and off my entire life. I think at the end of the day, people should have the option and the right to do whatever they want with their body, right? But the point was the content, like waking up to the reality that it's like, wait a minute, like this is fundamentally incorrect. Like what the government is saying about this, you can verifiably show, even using their own data, that it's incorrect. Like having patents for things for medical purposes and then claiming that it's a patent, a Schedule I drug, and it just kind of blew up my mind. We all have that one thing, for a lot, it was 9/11 and me, that earlier on, it was this cannabis thing, and it kind of just blossomed out. And we really realized that this is an all encompassing thing. And it also shows you that when the people can actually come together across party lines, which is a huge point for me today, that we can actually change things, right? The states, as much as there is, government manipulation and things going on around that whole topic, even in regard to the states and everything, that at the end of the day, what changed was the people. We said, that's crazy, we don't agree. And then we actually had enough momentum to make local governments stand up against the federal government. Like, realize how powerful that is. And not just one, not two, but what? Now we're 30 plus states. More than, I think, I haven't been keeping track after so many years, but it's like 4 or 5 now that are recreational. And, and it's just, that's a really big deal. We need to think about that in regard to coronavirus, in regard to our First, Second Amendment rights, or, what's going on today, that we can actually stand up, and we have that right to stand up and say that, no, we are the ones that make this call, not you. You are the living embodiment of what we want to happen, or so we're told. That's the illusion at the end of the day. I think we're all beginning to realize.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When stuff like that is provable, and I think most people would agree, we've been lied to about marijuana for a long time, for many different interests, because of they want you on their drugs, they want you growing your own, stuff like that. Like, without a doubt, there has been a campaign of spreading lies and scaring people into not touching it. Growing up, I'm 35, and we grew up with, we had the DARE officers in our class, and everybody was weed was basically in the same category of cocaine, meth, whatever, all those hard drugs. And today, like, kids growing up, they look at weed as, like, I don't know, like tobacco or alcohol, so it's like, it's amazing how that changed.
Well, I should point out right off the bat, though, that the reality is, and this is one of the reasons why, and it's so intrinsic, our society is so invested in alcohol, but alcohol is provably in many cases worse than methamphetamine for an average user, right? Like not just a guy who drinks at the bar at the weekends, but someone who's an alcoholic versus somebody who's an addict of meth. The alcohol is actually more damaging to your body. Really think about that, and that's the illusion.
Well, it's actually I mean, and my drug of choice is alcohol, and
It is for most Americans, yeah.
Yeah, I drink. I'm Portuguese. My dad makes wine. My grandparents made it. I mean, throughout the generations, and it's a huge part of our culture and whatnot. But without a doubt, yeah, and even when I was defending, I remember growing up defending weed. I mean, I had Adam Scorgi on a long time ago when he did the union, the business behind marijuana, I think is the name of it. He also did the film The Culture High, which is all about the war on drugs and stuff like that. And he, I was defending it, and a lot of people thought I smoked weed or whatever, and I'm like, no, I'm actually a drinker. But I will agree that this plant, it does less harm than the drug of choice I have. Like when you look at all the things that's connected, the negative things that are connected to alcohol in regards to domestics. I mean, you talk to police officers, they'll tell you there's a huge percentage of domestics that somebody's been drinking. Like, so there's definitely been some alcohol involved. You look at car accidents, you look at so many, so many negative things, and there are some positive things. I mean, I truly believe that there's been some intimate, conversations I've had with my friends around, having a cigar or having a drink and sitting around that might have not happened if we weren't relaxing, having a bourbon or having a glass of wine, and it kind of helped put the guard down and stuff like that. But, I try to be down the middle and understand, like, okay, there are some benefits of it in regards to maybe social benefits and whatnot, but there's also tons of negatives. And there's alcohol abuse. I mean people who have alcoholics in their family, I mean, they're traumatized. I mean the horror. I mean, imagine being a little child and your dad gets hammered, and based on how drunk he is, you're afraid if you're going to get beat up or not. Like living in that horror every day. And how, what happens to you as a child. I mean, that's the scariest part, is that, like, I feel like as an adult, you go through some trauma, we can handle it a little better. But when you're talking about children, like, they go through some trauma, like, that stuff sticks with them forever and affects their outlook on life. It affects everything. I mean, so it is amazing. I mean, and I've talked to past guests about this, about how, that small period of your life where you're developing your brain and your emotions and how your perspectives, like, the stuff that happens there affects you forever much more than the stuff that happens to you when you're an adult. And so, yeah, I mean, without a doubt.
Yeah. I mean, and the point should be very clear that it's not that either of us are suggesting that you shouldn't be allowed to try any of them. The point is, it should be your choice to decide how and when and to what degree you enjoy these things, whatever that may be. And seeing that it's kind of a weird, similar thing to the free speech aspect, right? I'm not arguing that I think people should be out there doing heroin. I think it's bad for you. And I think it has really very serious effects very quickly. And a lot of these do, even alcohol, any of them, right? But there's a difference between natural things versus certain things that are created, right? I mean, I would even argue there's a huge difference between opium naturally and heroin. Anyway, the point is that individuals should have the right to choose those things. But you should argue that there's things that are bad. I think alcohol, at the end of the day, Dr. David Nutt in the UK, and I think this was the 90s, came out with a huge study that, again, verifiably showed that alcohol was worse than methamphetamines. That's when I first picked up on this, he got blackballed. They fired him, they covered it up, and then later in the 2000s, it came back up again, and hey, look, this guy knew it back then, and the governments were trying to cover it up, Again, these things should apply to where we are now and all this stuff, in particular. Not to get into a very contentious topic, but with vaccines and things that we're dealing with today, and how that should, at the very least, realize that they don't have your best health in mind. It's not really about that.
I mean, well, I've had Del Bigtree on, and you've talked about vaccines on your show. I mean, it is the thing is too, and this is what I love about your show, and this is why, similar to Corbett's a show, who's been on a bunch of times because I'm a huge fan of his, Sam Tripoli. I mean, I love shows like yours who. You're not. Everything's so political. Everything's political. Everything. It's like if you hate Trump, then he didn't take the coronavirus seriously enough, and hydroxychloroquine, which is an essential drug, it's been an essential medicine forever, is bad and dangerous. And if you like Trump, then then that's the drug of choice. And well, let's open things up. And it's like same thing with this, this George Floyd murder is same thing. Like if you're, if you're on one side, if you're on the left, then every protester can do no harm. And if you're on the other side, then every protester is an awful person. And the thing, like, that's what you're down. You look at things logically, and you don't pick teams. And that's what I love. It's so hard to find people like you to talk to, because it's like 5 seconds into a conversation, you're like, you can figure out in most cases where people stand on stuff. And the thing about you and I is that we probably could have a bigger platform if we just picked a team and just like, start an echo chamber of like, yeah, I'm with you guys. Come on, support me, but we probably piss off both sides all the time, because it's like, I'm for the protests in regards to, the lockdown, the people who are protesting the lockdown. I'm for protests. Guess what? I'm also for these protests now too, but I'm not for vandalizing things and there's a lot of obviously sketchiness with where these pallets of bricks came from, and if obviously we know the history of agent provocateurs and stuff like that, so we don't know what's really going on and who's really causing the violence, but we also understand, like, okay, not every cop is bad either. It's not a war against, like, there's shitty people everywhere. I think the most dangerous thing about, and that's why I think being a cop is one of the hardest jobs in the world, because if there's a shitty person who works at Starbucks, worst case scenario, I'm just going to get a shitty coffee. But if a shitty person is a police officer and he makes some bad decisions, it could mean somebody's life. So like having a bad apple there is much more dangerous.
And I would argue that's an important point there. And it's important because there's so people that are so emotionally tied to this topic that right there, they would argue that, no, all police are, it's like all encompassing. And the reality is that it's actually in the middle there, because the reality is I would completely agree with you. I have police officers in my family are actually retired, but the point being that there are people in there. But the reality is that it is the system and it is the actual infrastructure around this that are creating this culture, right? They're the same way that Noam Chomsky talks about the mainstream media, right? They wouldn't allow them to be in those positions if they didn't already hold certain beliefs. And most of them don't realize in those positions that they had been cultivated into it, right? They think it's totally organic and they're right on track, right? The reality is it's been created. Same thing with these police forces. There's a reason they've been militarized, and the people that actually think like we do are driven out, whether forcefully, aggressively, or just kind of shunning them, and that's a really important aspect. And I actually see this today as the people like you and I, the people that can effectively realize that the two-party system, and that doesn't, people can still be a supporter of Trump or Pelosi or whatever, and still realize that there's a two-party lie there. I argue they're still a little bit lost, thinking that Trump would be somebody fighting them or Pelosi would be fighting for them. But at the end of the day, that the two-party system is ultimately the block there, that it's allowing people to ignore an entire side of the argument, which makes them miss what's really happening, and nothing ultimately changes. And that's put in that place for a reason, and that people like you and I are and there's a lot of us out there. I actually, again, people don't agree with this. I believe it's the majority today. I really do. I think people like us have been, there's probably a small percentage of us that realize that case. And then there's a huge portion of that majority that doesn't realize they're the majority, and they're quiet and they self-censor and they're afraid to say anything because they don't want to be the fringe, But the point is that's everyone else is still lost in these illusions. Like you pointed out with the protests, it is ridiculous to argue that either everyone is violent or everyone is peaceful. I mean, are we children? I mean, there's nuance to every discussion. It's very clear that there are looters and rioters. And I argue with your same point that there's clear, whatever you want to call it, manipulation taking place. But it's obvious that there's protesters. There's numerous examples of massive protests with people. And there are people now that are actively going out there with the intention of making sure that anybody that starts being violent is immediately dealt with by the protesters. So how can you argue that everyone is violent? It is clearly an illusion, and then they battle each other and they miss the whole picture. It's really sad. But this applies to coronavirus, in my opinion. I think this is all part of it. I think that doesn't mean that, however you want to think it started, at the end of the day, it's being used, right? This is being used to put the lockstep plan in that I talked about, the martial law idea. It's 26 different states now with curfews and locked. I mean, how do we see this any other way? I mean, this is pretty horrifying. And this is exactly what they were just calling for coronavirus. What do you know?
and it is all kind of linked together, because if you look at people like yourself and myself and Corbett and other people who've been talking about the coronavirus for the last couple months and talking about eugenics and vaccines and Bill Gates and all this stuff, well, guess what? Like, eugenics is linked to the racist issue, because, how do you talk? I don't know how people cannot learn the history of eugenics and still feel like they're informed about racism, because that's where it kind of started. It didn't start there.
The Rockefellers, right?
But it was really pushed there. This idea that you're trying to scientifically find a way to justify your racism by saying, hey, we have peer review studies that they are less smart than us. They are, less capable than us, and justifying them being on top and being the decision makers because
right.
they are the elite, and that's the thing. Like, it's
studies
not,
they paid for, right, and then they created.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, and it's something you talk about often, and it's true. It's not about like when you get the left and right fighting. You get whites and blacks fighting. You get police officers and non-police officers fighting, and yet those in power could give a rat's ass about any of that stuff. I mean, their ideology is money and power and an influence. It's not. They don't give a shit about anything. That's why that movie Network. Remember Network back in the day? It was with he's like, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it. And remember the news reporter who got mad? If you haven't watched,
yes, I do remember that. It's an older one, right?
Yeah, it's older one from, I believe, the 70s.
Yeah,
during one of his meetings, he's like, there is no I don't know if I forget what he said now, but like, there is no religion, he's like, there's only DuPont, there's only this, basically making the point that like all these ideologies are pointless. It's all about power and money, and everything else doesn't matter. I mean, you look at like the U.S., for example, we care about human rights and whatnot. That's so often a motivation of ours to get involved in certain conflicts. But yet Saudi Arabia is one of our greatest allies, and they stone women for, so it's like,
they're actually on the Human Rights Council at the UN. Think about that.
Yeah, it's insane. So that's why when people talk about like Trump or they pick a team or whatever, it's like, it's hard for me to even get involved in politics, because it's like me if I get involved in the conversation about if Trump's good or bad, it's like me deciding if Hulk Hogan's good or bad. It's like I'm falling for the puppet show. Like, I understand it's just a puppet show, and I can't put like that aside and pretend like what happens on TV matters, because it's like, so many times, like these debates, what they say or how they say it, everything's manipulated. It's, they have strategies on how do they spin stories, on certain phrases they use or don't use. If they want to come off strong, I mean, look at Cuomo. Like, you could tell, like, one of his tactics was, when I speak, I want to sound like an alpha male, like I'm presidential almost, probably because he's going to attempt to run for president eventually. But it's a tactic. So it's like, if you fall for that, if you think this person is a good person or a good speaker or a good leader or not a good leader because of these tactics they're using, you're falling for it, because that's exactly what they're doing. It's not that he's actually a good leader. It's the fact that he's making you believe he is, and that's all it is. It's all this idea of making you believe that they're for this issue or not for that issue, or they're not corrupt or not as corrupt as that person, and it's all just like, it's a puppet show. And so when people fall for this, it's like, I'm like, to me, that's not a topic that I care that much about. Like, if what's going on specifically with Trump and all the political battles between the left and the right, and that politician's good, and that, it's like, to me, it's like, that's not, because you don't know what to believe. And it's not till years later that we find out that, like, they were pushing this foreign policy because of this reason, or they weren't, or they were friendly with these people because of that, so it's I probably should have a question after that rant. But,
no, I got plenty. I mean, the whole thing is, the idea is that we need to realize that we're beginning to see that it's all an illusion, right? And I would argue plenty of them involved in it don't even realize that they're pawns in it. There's a lot of these useful idiots out there, not to use that term, because that draws other opinions on people, but these people really are that. They're like, they don't realize that they're the ones like Trump watching Fox News and talking about it, whether that's part of the illusion or not. Some of them are like that. They actually watch the mainstream media and they think they've got the inside because they're buddies with the guy on TV, right? They're just as lost as the housewife watching Fox News and thinking it's real. There's some of those out there, but I argue there's more of them that are deeply involved, but at the end of the day, that's what we're seeing. I mean, it's all, they build these things based on their lies, and the history is very clearly there. Look, take a current event right now with the Insurrection Act, right? The only reason, and you can see these things in every event in the past, and you're right that you end up swinging back later and going, oh, it turns out this was really why. And yet we can't draw the comparison to today and realize that they're doing the same thing now, right? The idea of the Insurrection Act is this is, by the way, for those that don't know, what Trump just initiated in regard to the protests, right? And all of it arguing that it's all riots and looters. But even then, the Insurrection Act is not talking about riots and looters. It's talking about an insurrection. It's talking about an armed uprising or rebellion from outside, for the most part, is what it means. And that is in no way logical to what's happening today. So not only is he openly saying we don't care about your constitutional rights, or at the very least, it's a switch I can turn off when I choose, but that they manufactured the lies, allowed police to go out and beat people up that didn't deserve it, just so they could put this act through and use that to justify the martial law, in my opinion, that was already part of the plan. And it's amazing that people can hear something like that and be like, oh, you conspiracy theorist. And it's like, how many times are you willing to say that and then see a year, 2 years, 10 years down the line that it turns out that we were right when we said it? Doesn't mean all of them are right, but take the basics, right? Fluoride in the water, geoengineering, NSA spying on you. I mean, on and on and on. They called us crazy, and from the very people who knew it wasn't crazy were the ones loudest shouting at us. We just have to break free of this. And I think right now, why I keep kind of tying it back in with I feel what's happening right now is the most important thing we could ever react to and do something about or stand up about in this country. If we are about to see a change, irrevocable change that we will never be able to come back from unless we do something about it. And I am not advocating for violence. That doesn't mean I don't argue that violence is necessary when you're being attacked or you're protecting your family or your loved ones. But I don't argue we should go out there and initiate violence. But damn it, we need to realize that the Insurrection Act, the Defense Production Act, all the things that we're doing, it's leading towards everything they've already been planning long before coronavirus was even a topic. And we've documented it on the show. Whitney Webb has done some great articles. I mean, it's all laid out. All you need to do out there is just look at it, pay attention, think about it,
Well, that's the thing. A lot of the information is just right there. And usually when you're debating people, it's like 5 seconds into the conversation, you realize like, holy shit, you haven't really looked into this, have you? But yet you're willing to argue with me till the end of time about it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's one of the things that like boggles my mind. I've told people since the beginning of this, you've talked about it. So many of us have talked about how they've been inflating the numbers on the coronavirus, and people are like, oh no, I don't, that's not true. And I'm like, Dr. Birx, during a press conference, said we're being very liberal with our coronavirus numbers, that we're counting things with, the coronavirus and by the coronavirus as the same. Like, she's saying this on a press conference that millions of people are watching, and then 2 seconds after the press conference, people are watching CNN, and they're, not talking about that clip. They're talking about something that Trump said, and people just completely forget about it. And it's just like, that's why it was important. There's
a ploy there. I argue that Trump might even be involved in that manipulation. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. But there are some positives to this, because a lot of people that, I mean, I have two little ones. My son's 5, my daughter's 3. I'm quite open with the fact that neither of them have ever been vaccinated, and I'm open with it because of the fact that, like you said, something that is very important. There's a lot of people who do feel the same, but they're not the ones who are outspoken. They might be more passive. They don't want to get in conflict. They want to avoid conflict, arguing online or whatnot. And I remember once on like my Instagram or Twitter somewhere, I put like a poll, and I'm just like, hey, how many people think that this coronavirus thing is? I forget what the question was, but it was basically like if you're for the lockdown or against the lockdown. And so many people were saying they were against, because it was a poll, and they didn't have to publicly say anything. Mm-hmm. And I have people message me saying, I'm so glad you're outspoken about this, but I can't say anything because I don't want to get in these Twitter wars or these Facebook wars or whatever.
It's dangerous. I mean, we're literally in a point now where there was a German doctor who questioned the lockdown. They put her in a psych ward for 3 days. That's a legitimate story. And she's out, but that happened, right? Just because she questioned the standing authority, the narrative of the authority, WHO or whoever, I think right now is the time to sacrifice everything to stand up for the truth. But I understand that there are people out there that, have families and careers that they can't sacrifice. You can be fired from your job today for having an opinion that people don't agree with. I've seen examples of it across the board. And there's actually, they argue in many cases when they want to, that it's actually a mental disorder. I forget the term for it now. There's a couple of them they've laid out. Dysfunction. It's I forget it now. But the point is, they actually made a medical term and argued that that's a disorder, and all it is you having a resistance to authority. That's all it is. And you even read it. That's literally what it is. But they argue it's a mental disorder. So now they can say, well, you're sick, so we need to medicate you, and it's not your choice because you're sick. That's so I get it. People out there have a reason to be scared.
Well, we both know the DSM and all that mental illness stuff is kind of bullshit anyways, and not really based on any real science. It's all like, well, if you seem like you're like this, then you could have that, and here's a pill, and if it doesn't work, here's another pill. If that doesn't work, here's another. Oh, you have a chemical imbalance. By the way, we're not going to test you for any chemical imbalance because we don't know which chemical's imbalance, so we don't know how to regulate that chemical. So just take a bunch of pills and become a guinea pig. Like it's so ridiculous.
I remembered oppositional defiance disorder. That's one of them anyway. I think a singer, Novak, I believe, has a song about it and everything. It's funny. Sorry, go ahead.
Is there have they come out with a medication or something for it? Because I feel like that's the next step.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point was it wasn't like here. It's not something you can like medicate away. The idea is that it's a psychosis, So you're going to get some kind of antipsychotic medication or antidepressant or whatever they want to give you anyway, right? The things that they're shoving down children that are under 1 year old. That's a real stat, by the way. There are kids that are. I think last time I checked, it was like just under 1 million kids in this country under 1 year old that are on antidepressants. Hundreds of thousands on them under 1 year old that are on antipsychotics. How do you justify something like that? It's crazy.
It is. And we were talking about the censorship and stuff online. I mean, what they did to Dr. Judy after the pandemic documentary went viral. I mean, the fact that I was getting people who were saying she was an anti-vaxxer, they were saying that it's a right-wing conspiracy theory documentary. And I'm like, do you want to argue any points in the documentary?
Yeah,
or do you
like facts?
Yeah, because it's hilarious because like everybody that I got in a discussion about it, I'm like, well, what about the documentary did you disagree with? Because I might agree that maybe that's wrong or incorrect, but I'm like, I think there's a lot of good information in it, and at least a alternative perspective that many people didn't have that's worth people listening to, and they can decide for themselves. But this idea, like, people should be worried. Some people said that, I've heard people in the kind of in the alternative media saying, well, we should be worried about the fact that it went viral that quickly. That could be a concern, that maybe there was something to that. Yeah.
Skepticism's always good.
Yes. Yeah. But I also think that you shouldn't disregard it because of that either, right. And when you see it being completely censored, it was like that other documentary, Out of the Shadows. Was it Out of the Shadows? Something like that.
That's one I play on my show at the end, but I know that if that was censored or not. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, that there. Well, did you see that it was actually pulled from the Google Drive too?
Oh, I think I heard that on your show.
I just reported. Yeah, they literally pulled from a personal copy on Google Drive. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that going into your personal information or your personal, I guess storage and just it's wild. And then her they did the same thing to Ben Swan, I believe, but her Wikipedia was like locked and. It said, the first line was like anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist. And I'm just like, I don't understand. Like when she was working for the government and doing research, then she wasn't a conspiracy theorist then, right? Like all of a sudden I'm like, or maybe there's some valid points to her story. And the thing is like, we understand. I think this is one of the problems too, is I think people, because of the years and years of like lying about Vietnam, lying about the Iraq war, we have plenty of good examples, undeniable examples, that the military-industrial complex has huge influence and can manipulate the public, can sell you propaganda, can influence politicians, and to get what they want. But people don't believe Big Pharma has the same type of power. And the truth is, they might have more, right?
I see it as kind of one and the same. But yeah, I completely agree. I mean, what we have to realize is, excuse me, that there is absolutely a monolithic governmental presence throughout all of these things, and this is where we need to see today, and this is why I argue there is such this focus on the concept of fascism, like from a controlled setting. Right, the Antifa I think Antifa is a government construct, at least from the top. Same way that they are, at least that they took control of it, the same way they did the Occupy movement. That's a fact, right? They take it from top and they drive it into the ground. But I definitely think that the fascism part of it is an illusion. That I mean, look, these people that call themselves anti-fascists are literally conducting fascist activity. Like, that's so stupid. I mean, there's a huge inherently contradictory aspect to all of this stuff in the extreme parts of these today. But the idea is that fascism is exactly what we are leaning into in this country. I mean, we're seeing one of the core tenets of fascism is the blending of corporate and governmental actions, and they're blending the corporate and government world behind the scenes. That's Facebook and Atlantic Council, and you know what I mean. And suddenly that's what we are. But now when you point to that, you suddenly get pitted on the two-party paradigm, and that's why they do that. I think there's really something to that we really are going in this authoritarian direction. They just don't. They want that to sound like a talking point when it's just obvious that it's happening. And again, it's back to the two-party illusion. I just can't get past that. It's every single day I come back to these points, it always leads back to that being the key, the linchpin in why people can't see the full picture. And it just kills me.
Yeah, well, because people they defend the thing about humans is that their ideas, their perspectives should be much more complex, and you shouldn't be able to simplify them by saying, here's a political party, and I agree, I just happen to agree with them on every single issue all the time, or I agree with the other political party all the time. And when you see people do that, it's like, wait, like, no political party, especially when there's only two, in many other countries there's many, you shouldn't be, as much as you love your political party, there's no way that if you're a free thinking person, critical thinking person, that you can agree with them on every issue all the time. But you see it over and over again. I mean, the same people who, and that's the problem about like posting things online. It's like if I post something about oxychloroquine and how it was an essential drug for many years, and then people think that I'm a Trump supporter. If I post things about, whatever. I mean, it's just like they put you, perfect example is like when Hillary and Trump are running against each other. If I post an anti-Trump thing, something that was maybe negative, shining a negative light on Trump, people are like, what, do you like Hillary? No. If I post something that was negative on Hillary, people will be like, oh, what are you, a Trump supporter? It's like, listen, can we just talk about this specific thing and not care, like, what side I'm on? Because I'm on neither side. I was constantly telling people, I'm like, I'm not defending anybody. All I'm saying is like, this is an important piece of information that I think you should be aware of. And that's it. And same thing with this. Like, I'm not, with the protests, if he goes around, with martial law places that have been peaceful, or if he says something that's racist, I'm going to call him out on it. And
we should.
Yeah, and we should. And, when he was asking for the country to open up and seem like he was more skeptical, he was more skeptical of the virus being a threat than, a lot of people on the left, then, I'm for him on that. But I'm not with him on every issue. I have a love-hate relationship with Trump. In some cases, yeah, he does great things. But when he was, trying to get in Venezuela again, I was one of the first ones that like, what the fuck, man? What about like the military-industrial complex and worry about people at home first and America first and all this stuff? And now you're just, bombing places and getting involved in other countries. So it's like, but people who are Trump supporters will just, they'll find some way to justify that stuff. And then people like yourself where you are down the middle and you're willing to be like, okay, well, this is what's going on. This is my opinion on what's going on. And you don't pick a team. Like if somebody said, let me watch a Ryan video and see what team he's on, they're going to be confused as all fuck, because like the first 5 minutes are like, oh, he's on the right. And like, wait, no, now I think he's on the left.
Well, what happens is just like what they do is they wait for one of those key things you pointed out, whatever they are, and they see it. They go, oh, they're done. There it is. He's right. He's left. I get called a left from the right, a right from the left. I mean, you see it. It's the same nonsense. And the sad part of it is that they're all lost, as we keep pointing out. It's funny how we see a lot of this coming from the right saying it's collectivism. Look at this mind virus that the left has. It's the same exact thing on the right. And just in different ways, right? I mean, you have the same derangement. Like I say the Trump derangement syndrome on both sides of this. Right. And it's just from different perspectives, and it's like you do have a lot of these more, on surface level, rational people that are speaking from this and pointing to the extreme parts of the left. And so it gives you this picture of look at how clean and rational and they are very rational in a lot of ways, but they miss the exact same thing they're pointing to when it applies to the right. So there's a blind spot there, so you find a lot of those people that are damn near aware of everything we're talking about, except when it comes right back to the main point of their core party alignment. And there's a lot of people out there like that do really good research up until it comes to that reality, whether they're QAnon people or whatever, and it is a problem, and it is collectivism, however you want to look at it, and it allows these things to happen. And that's what's so frustrating. I mean, there was a block of bills that they passed, like over 15 bills just a week ago, all in one sitting. Didn't even list the names off, just read off 15 different bill numbers, and then they all voted for it. Within that was about 5 different bills that were very clearly were bills for Israel, bills about the anti-Semitism czar, bills about Golan Heights, in particular, a bill during what's happening while 40 million Americans don't have jobs and all these businesses are shut down to give $38 billion again to Israel over the next 10 years. And one of those years, which is this next year, that's $3.8 billion. So in the next year, they've already agreed to give Israel $3.8 billion while people don't have jobs and can't feed their families. Think about that. Think about what $3.8 billion just in this next year could do for all of Americans. I did the math on it. You can do about, I think it was $50,000 loans. You can end up doing like 400,000 loans around the country. Now, forgive me if that math's incorrect. I pulled it off what I thought it was before, but it's something like that. Do you think, I mean, think that could literally save the economy in regard to small businesses, or a huge portion of it. But no, and the problem is that people won't look at it the right way because of the two-party politics. And truthfully, that one topic is one that's kind of partisan in the negative way, but it is really sad. And I hate that it feels like we belabor the point on the two-party topic, but I just can't get it past the point that is the one thing that we need to focus on and change. And the reality is there's so many people that are either invested in the illusion because it's beneficial to them or are being paid to sell it that are very influential today from the left and the right. And we all see them. They're all the blue check mark, not political, like they don't have a political office. They're not in, anything other, just a social media influencer, and they're out there constantly berating everybody that doesn't believe what they say and constantly selling all the points, hydrochloroquine is the one thing we should only be using and everything else is bad. It's like, no, that probably works and probably other things do too, and it's so incredibly frustrating to me.
It is. And, you see the left, the left thinks that Russia is the boogeyman, the right thinks China's the boogeyman, and neither of them realize that they're both trying to sell you a boogeyman. It's like, right. If you talk to somebody on the right, they'll be like, yeah, they keep pushing this Russia thing. No. But hey, how about China? China's the boogeyman. And if you talk to somebody on the left, it's like, China's not the boogeyman. The right keeps pushing the boogeyman. Russia's the boogeyman. It's like you're both tricked. And it's like, yeah, of course, there's going to be examples of China and Russia doing things in their best interest, the same way the U.S. has done it forever.
Think about the block. How incredible is that? Like, how can you literally be staring at the exact example and being like, look at how crazy and stupid they are. There's no evidence for that. It's a complete lie. And then here is another thing exactly like that with no evidence, but I believe this one. It's like, what goes on in their minds? Like, I keep calling it, that's schizophrenic. Like, there's a weird thing happening today where people I don't even think a lot of people realize they're doing it. I think there's like a schism, like Caitlin Johnstone writes about this, that, we are the most propagandized people on the planet. Think about what that does to your psyche, what it does to your mental health, whether we're glorifying violence or shoving medications down your throat or fluoride in your water or, glyphosate in everything everywhere or, on and on and on. And suddenly, and we're selling you on the idea that, murdering all these people is for freedom, right? Which doesn't even make sense. So people just kind of break. And it's like, and then you just kind of, it's almost like split personalities. And I'm starting to wonder if that was exactly the intention. Like there was like an intentional way to like break the psyche of the American people. It's interesting.
I've said on the show before, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And I think that's a huge issue. I mean, even the COVID-19 thing, it's like, there's so many people who are, even though they're out rioting and there should be some incredible increase of COVID cases, the media is like, oh, we don't give a shit. Like we're going to get more eyes talking about the riots and protests. So let's just focus on that. And it's like the same media that like 2 weeks ago was telling you that this is the biggest thing, and it's like people are dying, and without a doubt, Trump's not taking this seriously enough, and states are opening up too soon, and now they're like, well, we're not worried about that. People want to see the protest thing, so let's just focus on that and just show this violence and even the protesting. It really is a very it's a complicated topic because it's very few people like nobody should agree that what the cop did was right, and nobody should agree that protesters were being violent, and in some cases, there was that Scores sports bar where it was black owners, and they had to tell like the people who vandalizing their business, like, hey, we're the owners, like you're hurting us, like we're supposed to be all together, like you're hurting us too, and you see a lot of white people vandalizing shit, and I'm like, what? Like, wait, I get you peacefully protesting with them, like we're all for that, we're all for getting rid of racism, and we know it exists, but like what the fuck are you doing vandalizing shit? Like your people aren't the ones who've been suppressed for generations and generations. Like I get being angry about it, but like I can somewhat understand the logic of somebody being so angry about this. I mean, because it is. There's a great documentary, if you haven't seen it, called Mafa 21. I've talked about it almost every time the eugenics gets brought up, because it really is. I think the full title is Mafia 21: Black Genocide in the 21st Century, and it really goes through the history of it, and really it really was Black genocide. And people who, if you're of African descent and you know the history and you know what how your people were suppressed, and even there's a great documentary called Bloods and Crips Made in America, another great documentary. It's about the gangs, but it's not really about the gangs. It's kind of a history on how and why those gangs were created, and it was racism that created those gangs. And when you learn stuff like that, yeah, I can understand you being angry. But when I see people out there who aren't Black, vandalizing things and breaking things, one, you're hurting the movement, and two, what the fuck? What do you like? You can't be as upset as the people who have family members who actually went through it, and it makes me wonder, like you talked about before, agent provocateurs, COINTELPRO. I mean, all these things come to mind. Like, is there more to the story? Is there more going on?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we make a conscious effort to not get pulled into the racial part of that discussion, because it's in regard to, not because it's not real, not because racism doesn't exist, not because there's not a time that discussion should be the discussion should basically always be had in regard to what's happening today. But what's happening right now in regard to how they're using it, that they're trying to abuse the situation. They're trying to manipulate people, knowing that this would cause emotional outrage, So I think that by and large, I think people out there that are going around and starting the violence, I think that's instigated. I think that's intentional, whether white or Black or whatever. I think that's coming from an authority standpoint in a lot of ways. There are just people out there that just decide to riot. But I would argue that at some level, it was started, like whether we're talking about that guy that's already been exposed as a cop with the umbrella and the whole thing, whether it was him, which everyone seems to say that's kind of where it all began, that started the violence, and then somebody in another city saw it on TV and said, screw it, I'm going to steal this TV. It still started with the spark that lit it, and that is the authority figure that allowed it or that made it happen, and so it's important that we see that a manipulation happening. Before we jump into it, because like for instance, there are people that are out there making comments about this and saying, this shouldn't be this or this shouldn't be that. And then you're getting, like, even myself. And then I get people that come on and say, like, you don't understand this. You know nothing about the kind of thing. And it's like, what does that do? What do you think that's going to accomplish? There are people out there that would scream that you have no right to speak because of your skin color. Those are the people you should be talking to about that. Maybe you don't think I have a right to speak about what I think about this because I don't have a certain skin color. But guess what? That's racist. Right. And despite that, I'm fighting for the idea of the oppressed, the people under that tyrannical boot. You know what I mean? So it just bothers me that people come around and try to shout you down because they don't think you have a right to say these things because they have a more valid standpoint. And that applies in all walks of all kinds of conversations. The point is that we need to see that we are on the same side. The enemy are the people that are using us against each other. You know what I mean? And again, to reiterate, that doesn't mean those other conversations are not important, that shouldn't be had, that don't exist. Again, it comes back to the nuance, right? As always.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, because I think people do get caught up in the white versus Black or who has a right to have an opinion or whatnot. I always say, like, the extreme opposite of racism is not giving a fuck what your nationality or color is and treating everybody exactly the same. Like, that's the essence of completely deleting racism from our culture. So what does that mean?
That's never possible, though.
No, it's probably not. But my point is, like, so when somebody says, hey, just because I'm not Black doesn't mean I don't have an opinion, or just because the thing is, like, there's Black police officers, there's white protesters. So there's people of both colors on both sides. It doesn't mean all cops are bad. It doesn't mean all protesters are bad. And like you said, and this goes back to, I guess, harping on the same thing, but it's so important. People have to realize how they use that to turn people against one another, because it quickly became a political thing where just like you're either anti-Trump or pro-Trump, you're either for the protesters or anti the protesters. You don't have to pick a side. Like, you can decide exactly that it's a constitutional right to protest, just like when they're protesting, people were protesting against the lockdown. I think absolutely, I'm all for that. Freedom of speech is important. I think we're both one of those people that when you have a opinion, like, you you feel like, I have to say it. I want to share it. I want to, if you're at a dinner, even though, it'll mess up the family dinner, if somebody says something that's incorrect, you might be more willing to get into that little debate because it's the desire to avoid conflict isn't as strong as the desire to spread truth and information and have these discussions. Because I think the thing, like we've been told for a long time, was like, hey, you don't talk about religion or politics at dinner, right? And I'm just like, so we can argue about sports all day. We could literally be in a screaming match about if Tom Brady is the best quarterback ever or whatever. But God forbid we get in a debate about something that's actually important, that actually affects our outlook on our lives and the world around us. Like, to me, like we shouldn't be saying don't have those discussions. We should be saying, how do we have those discussions in a civil manner? And that's what's important.
Absolutely. Well said. I mean, it's about this is a good way to see it too. Every time what you just explained happens on either side, it always falls into the ad hominem attacks and the gaslighting. And there's a reason for that, because there's nothing foundational there, right? It's an illusion. That's the point. So when you start talking about how this was an unjust killing, you get talks about how he was a porn star or he was doing drugs. They found drugs in the system or blah. What does that have to do with anything? At the end of the day, no one's arguing it. I mean, look, it's irrelevant to what happened. The person's life was taken, and it was done in a way that was unjust, unconstitutional, that it didn't across the board. So it doesn't matter if the guy was a criminal. It doesn't matter. I mean, there's a part in a time where those things are relevant. It's not when deciding whether or not something is against the law. It's not when deciding whether or not the cop made an unconstitutional act, period. You know what I mean? And it's just so crazy how they keep pushing that in. And it happens every time. You're talking about, Dr. Fauci or Dr. Burr. Oh, well, she's tied to this and he's tied to... Okay, what about the facts and what they just said? Like you said about what you were saying earlier, right? They don't go into the points. That's intentional. And whether that's because they realize somewhere that they don't have an argument, or it's because they've been trained and coached and engineered by everything else to do that. It's funny you bring up the idea of I think what I said, I remember saying this when I was growing up, and it's weird that these things are there. I think these things are intentional. These little small things. There's social engineering that goes on all the time. I said it many times when I was a kid. Oh, you want to keep friends. You don't talk about politics and religion. I was guilty of it too, and then you realize, as you said, when you get somewhere, it's like, so all that effectively did was stop us from having any discussion of substance, right? And there's a reason for that. They don't want you involved in their game. They want you going to Walmart, eating your McDonald's, and watching your TV and just checking out. Apathy is the name of their game, It's important. We need to see that because we can wake up from it when you see it.
I've been so many places where people have gotten heated debates about soccer clubs, about whatever, any type of football, basketball. Who's the best basketball player of all time? Is it MJ? Is it Michael? Is it Bill Russell? Whoever. And people get in heated arguments about that, and never at the end of the day does somebody say, see, that's what you get for bringing up sports. You shouldn't have brought up sports. But if you get in a heated argument about politics, people are like, see, I told you shouldn't. You should know better. Don't bring up politics, or don't bring it. And it's not even politics a lot of the times. I mean, I think a lot of times people just find a way of making everything political. But if you're just talking about what's going on in the world, like, those are important discussions, like having these discussions. I mean, so often I talk about the importance of talking to people you don't agree with, because it forces you to challenge your own ideas. It forces you to look at things from a different perspective. And so many times, like, I'm like, okay, I stand on this, like, for example, this morning I was listening to Fault Lines, which you've been on there quite a few times. They haven't had you on there in a while. I was hoping they had you on during the COVID-19 thing. I don't know if that was accidental or not, but it seemed like a lot of people who were going against the grain with the COVID-19 thing, you, Corbett, even when they had Whitney on, they didn't really ask her anything specifically about that. And
even though that was what she was invited to talk about, by the way. There's a lot going on there, by the way, between there's some divide there happening between on fault lines and everything.
Yeah, well, I've been asking him to come on. I wanted to, I talked to both of them, and I'm like, I've in the past we talked about them coming on my show, and then schedules were busy or whatever, and then once this COVID thing started happening, I was listening. I'm like, this shit is driving me crazy. I'm like, I need to talk to these guys. I'm like, I want to call in, but the problem was that, like, you get to have a very complicated debate in like 2 seconds. It's like, oh, by the way, next segment, next caller. And it's like, so, I was trying to, I'm like, listen, I'm more than happy to have you guys come on. We'll have a long form discussion about the COVID-19 thing. And let's talk about it. I'm like, I'm not inviting you guys on to try to make you look dumb. I just really want to have a discussion about this. And I mean, I do like the fact that disagree on many cases, because I think that's important to hear both sides, and the fact that they can piss each other off so often and still yet work together, I think is great, because I think that is important, as long as both people are willing to also see things from each other's perspectives. But when the coronavirus thing was happening, when they were both kind of on the same team and they were kind of only pushing one narrative, I had a problem with that. I had a problem because, Alex Craner is another one who's been on there a few times, the author. He's been on my show. Quite a few people I'm like waiting to be like, oh, when are they going to invite Ryan on? Or when are they going to invite, somebody who's going to maybe push against the grain a little bit on what they're saying? And so I think you do a huge disservice when you only talk to people you agree with. And we need more. I try to host debates. I try to put a swapcast with people that are all respectful, all people who are friendly and are willing to not just share their opinions, but have their opinions challenged a little bit. And I think we all come from those conversations a little smarter and learning a little bit more. And at if you're married, I mean, one of the most important things is talking about your issues, not because you're going to agree at the end of it, but because like I'm going to have a better understanding of where they're coming from. And even if I still disagree, at least I know where they're coming from. And I think that is important.
That's a great comparison. I agree. Communication is one of the most important, I would say, if not the most important aspect of a relationship, whether that's a friendship or anything. It's communication. Honest communication is so incredibly important. But the idea about it all comes down to back into the idea of the other side being the enemy, kind of a thing. That's actually another part of a ploy, in my opinion. This is why, to go to your point in regard to like sports versus politics, that people act that way, is that they have been trained by their chosen side that the other, and this is a relatively new development that I've seen maybe since 2016 forward, that where they have developed this feeling that the other side is not just wrong or deceived or watching the wrong channel, but that they're the enemy, right? Now that if we can't effectively stop that, not the person and change their mind, but stop that idea, that's going to be the end of our country, right? That's this feeling, and both sides have it about each other, right? The right is fascist and they're Nazis and they're going to destroy the country. The left are and there's truth to all parts of these, right? Both these sides are out of their minds at the moment, in my opinion. But I think it's entirely intentional to make us have this animosity towards our neighbor. I mean, think of what they just did with COVID-19. Now we know that, as far like for maybe the people on your show might not yet know that the CDC, their own data now says about 0.26%, right? That's the reality of what these numbers are from their own data. And what do? They separated us, even in cases from your own family. Right? There's a reason for breaking that family unit, for keeping us disconnected, for not allowing us to have substance-filled conversations. There's a real thing happening here. And I just think we really need to wake up to that. And that, that could happen while, like, maybe if in your mind you think this is all legitimate and you believe everything they're saying, that can also still mean that they're abusing it, manipulating it, and using it to trick you, right? They're not mutually exclusive, right? So as you pointed out, historically, that's pretty much always what they've done.
Yeah, there's a documentary that came out some years ago called I think it was JFK to 9/11. Everything's a rich man's trick, and the title is really important because it's so true. I mean, you don't even have to watch the documentary. Like, everything is a rich man's trick. I mean, when you look at the influence that these, the Rockefellers, and now, people are becoming much more aware of the Bill Gates influence on everything. I mean, how he gives money to NPR shows and these nonprofit organizations and that nonprofit organization. I mean, this guy has his hand in everything. And what the fuck does this dude have to do with medicine and health? Like, if you and I say something about vaccines, you're like, well, you're not a doctor. Well, the most respected people in the vaccine world, that's going around giving lectures, talking to people on news shows about vaccines, isn't a doctor. Has nothing to do with, and it's like, and then some of his logic, like this idea of like, let's give out vaccines because the population's too high. So it's like, well, you're giving out something that supposedly supposed to save lives, but yet you're talking about the overpopulation issue. It's like, it's people. I think, when I prior, and I probably went on a long rant and then lost my train of thought, which is common for this show. But more people, I think, now than ever are much more open to seeing the other side of the vaccine debate, where prior to all this, a lot of people are like, oh, vaccines, vaccines. And it's crazy because even a lot of people who are still on that perspective, I tell people, I'm like, okay, let's have a logical conversation about it. If I give every kid in the world peanut butter, like, will it kill some kids? Yes. Without a doubt, not every every human body will have the exact same reaction of it. So is it logical to think that if I gave every single kid the exact same cocktail of vaccines, somebody's going to have a reaction to it and die or possibly have some neurological issues or whatever? Yes. So when people say, when people call somebody an anti-vaxxer because they say vaccines do cause injuries, it's obvious that they've done zero research on the topic at all, and they've just picked a team. And now a lot of those people who I thought, was more pro-vaccine, they were the same ones that I started seeing online saying, fuck that COVID-19 vaccine. I'm not taking that or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, so you're willing to give let your kids be the guinea pigs, but you don't want to take that, which was weird to me because I'm like, I don't get it. Like, you're willing to just, like, Big Pharma will just say, hey, poke your kid with this, don't worry about the warning label. Don't read the insert. There's some possible reactions, but don't worry about that. And you're like, okay, sure, why not? But then when it's you're like, hey, screw that. I don't want to take that new vaccine. Where's the logic of that?
Billions of dollars paid out in vaccine court, right? And the people that would argue that you're crazy don't even realize that exists. Think about how stupid that is, like how intentionally ignorant that is. And I forget that there's an actual name for the court, which is how you need to look it up. But it's a literal court where there's paid out billions of dollars for injuries that have gone through the court. And guess who pays for that court? For those that don't know, the taxpayer, not the vaccine company. That's why the intent's not there. That's why they don't actually care if it's really safe. And that's why people like Robert Kadlec are right now in charge of this, even though he's the one behind the anthrax vaccine back then. What they knew was hurting people, did it anyway, and they lost a lawsuit about that. The Pentagon lost the lawsuit, so they know it happened, and yet Kadlec is yet again in that position. Think about that. It just blows my mind. But I actually think right now that more people are speaking out about it than before, versus when Vaxxed came out, which again I recommend everybody should watch now, or the Truth About Vaccine series. Like, those things are suddenly, hey, they were telling the truth. What do you know? It's like waking up to it. But then again, I argue the false majority aspect. Like, back then, I argue that what happened with Vax and all that is that most people were allowed to be cowed. Even the ones that believed or knew there was something to it, they were like, ooh, look at how crazy they're reacting to that guy who said vaccines aren't, should be at least questioned. It's like, and they're like ruining the guy's life and getting him fired. And so people just quiet down. I think what's different now is that people believed it then too, but now, because of whatever else, COVID or whatever other lies are coming out, people are just they have more courage to stand up and say, you know what, this is crazy. And I think that's why it's not working. I think they're trying. I mean, they're clearly trying to do all these different efforts and coming over the top. I think the whole race war creation was because people weren't buying the illusion about COVID. I really do. But I think that's the difference. I think people are finding the courage today to stand up and say, look, man, these things are dangerous. Not just your RNA vaccine that's never been tested, that's going to alter genetic code that we've never understood, all these crazy things that you rushed out years faster than you've ever done before, and you've never succeeded in this, but just vaccines before too. The history of it. Listen to Dr. Kaufman and the history in regard to even the polio vaccine, or things that you're not supposed to be able to talk about, where the actual data shows that it wasn't actually effective even when it was happening. But we don't care about the data. We care about the narrative. I mean, it's pretty scary when you really think about it.
Yeah, in many of those cases, those examples you hear, like, well, if it wasn't for vaccines, this would still be around. That would be there. When you look at the data, a lot of those cases were going down. There was herd immunity going on before the vaccine could really.
There was a spike when they gave the vaccine. They show a spike in cases, and then it went back down to where it was before that. And they said it's success.
Yes, and same with the swine flu vaccine. I mean, 60 Minutes, you can find an old video of 60 Minutes talking about all the neurological damage the swine flu vaccine was given to people. So, I mean, without a doubt, and that's the thing, even the vaccine debate, it's not black or white, and I don't mean skin color. I mean, just in regards to it only being two sides to the debate. I mean, the Vax documentary wasn't an anti-vax documentary. It was about one specific, it really should have been called a whistleblower documentary, because that's what it's about. It's about a CDC whistleblower. And so, a lot of people who called it an anti-vax documentary, most likely they never watched it. Most likely, and then unfortunately, they do such a great job of demonizing certain people that, for Wakefield, Dr. Wakefield, for example. Ad
hominem attacks, just like we talked about, right? Nothing about the content.
Yeah, I mean, I had Dr. Brzezinski on years ago. I don't know if you know who Dr. Brzezinski is, but he had that.
What's his first name?
What the hell was his first name? Polish. He's a Polish doctor, obviously, Brzezinski. But what was his first name?
Maybe not. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you there, but I forgot. I don't think I've heard of him before.
I derail myself, by the way. But he had, it was a documentary about cancers by Eric Merola, and it was called like Brzezinski. The business behind cancer, something along those lines. But I remember having him. I'll send you. He was on years ago. He was like on the first year I did my show. It's a great documentary, and I mean, it will tug at your heartstrings too. The documentary. But this guy had he was considered like a medical genius, and got his PhD when he was in like his early 20s or something like that. Was like super smart, and then he found this treatment that was helping cancer, and of course he went to patent it. Or get it FDA approved, and then basically they just threw everything at him and just kept bringing him to court, hoping he'd run out of money. And his treatment actually had some success, and I think actually they might have probably talked to him in the documentary series called "The Truth About Cancer." I believe he was one of the doctors that were spoken to. But when I had him on, my show was like super small, and even when I had him on, like I was getting. I mean, I was like, what's up with all these tweets and all these messages? I mean, just tons of people, fake accounts, just tweeting at me. It's pseudoscience. It's fake. It's this and that. And then that's when it really hit me. I'm like, holy shit. Like, they're just discrediting this guy nonstop, that you can't even search his name without just getting a bunch of people saying it was a hoax, or it was same thing with the pandemic documentary. Like, you took down every copy of the film except footage of the film when people are saying it's being debunked and it's a hoax. So I'm like, wait. So it's not okay to see the film as a whole when people can come up with their own conclusions. But when somebody is manipulating the film by only playing certain clips and then putting in their 2 cents and giving your opinion, then that's completely okay to put a line. Like, people have to be skeptical of the fact when that happens, somebody is saying you're too dumb to decide. We're going to decide for you. And our version of the truth is the one that's acceptable.
That's a really great point. And the best way to think about that is to do it in the reverse, right? So right now, YouTube says we're not allowed to question what's the way they phrased it? The highly documented historical events or something like that about, in obviously talking about 9/11 and things they actually mentioned when they made that new guideline. Now, if I were to take something like that I disagreed with, some documentary. So say the World Health Organization came out and made a documentary about COVID-19, and I decided to break down that documentary and say, here's what's wrong. I disagree. That's fake. Guess what they would do? They would censor the damn thing because I'm not allowed to challenge their narrative. But in reverse, they're allowed to do the same. I mean, you made that's a really great point. People need to realize that is absolutely one-sided, that they are absolutely allowing the criticism without allowing your actual, you can't actually watch it in full. And the crazy thing about it is all the doctors that are standing up and I'll happily point out that I think there's a lot of things that were said in that documentary, even the portions of it that were, I guess, not substantiated enough. Like that, you could argue that she's an expert and that she has history there. And so if you want to know more, you can look into it or find where she's spoken about it. But she did say things where they didn't say, and here's the document, or, you know what I mean? Like, and so that was one of the main arguments. Oh, well, there's a bunch of claims and nothing else. But this person is an expert, as you said, in her field. And yes, they tried to discredit her, and you could argue that maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe she did do something, right? But we also have to see the very clear history of this government, as you just pointed out, going out of their way to discredit people just because they say something that they don't agree with. So as it always comes back to, big surprise, that we should be open-minded to it and look at it, listen to it, think about the data, and come to your own conclusions about it. That when you're listening to one doctor's opinion on it and saying, well, there you go, because he's a doctor, doesn't that then contradict why you should be not listening to Dr. Judy because she's a doctor? I mean, it's all irrational, And
the thing is, too, about doctors is that in your own personal life, it's quite common for people to get a second opinion on things. Yes. So what does it tell you? That tells you that not all doctors agree on everything all the time. I mean, the Brzezinski documentary, the guy who did the Brzezinski documentary actually came out with another documentary, Eric Merola, called the second opinion. And it's, that exists. But all doctors don't agree. So what does that tell you? You're just picking a doctor that you agree with. I think there's like a Norm Macdonald joke about a doctor told him to like change his diet or something like that. So he just kept going to doctors until he found one that told him that he was fine, and then he stuck to that doctor. And but that's there's truth to that. The fact that like they don't all agree. They're humans, and the same thing with like, police officers, judges, lawyers. Like we like to put certain people on pedestals, like, oh, their opinion is more valid than this person because they're a doctor, they have a PhD. Well, I've had doctors on my show that disagree with other doctors. Here's a perfect example. People probably, if they've heard me talk about this before. I don't know if you're familiar with Jim Abrams. He was the filmmaker who did Naked Gun and all that stuff. Okay. Airplane, some of my favorite movies growing up. But I'll try to say quick because people have heard this story and probably the podcast. I had him on, and he had a son who had very violent seizures. And, soon after birth, real violent seizures. Jim Abrams, tons of money, tons of resources, tons of friends in high places, got to see all the best doctors all over the U.S., got to cut in line for doctors who had a waiting time of months or whatever, prescription drugs, surgery, all this stuff for years and years. Nothing would work. One day he runs into some research about the ketogenic diet, right? And how the ketogenic diet, and I've been doing the ketogenic diet for years, so I'm a huge fan of this story and this whole thing. But and really the ketogenic diet is a story of manipulating the public. We've been lied to, eating a certain way, consuming carbs and sugars, and
that's one of the most largely censored topics on Facebook right now, as far as I can tell.
Really, yeah. And so he ends up, finding this research that Johns Hopkins had in the early 70s, and sometime in the 70s, that they were having a lot of success with getting children on the ketogenic diet, because one of the reasons, in some cases, one of the reasons why kids are having these violent seizures is because their brain can't process glucose as an energy source. So what ends up happening is you put the kid in ketosis, you get them run off fats as an energy source, because like I always tell people on the show, your body's a hybrid car. It can run off sugars and carbs, glucose, or it can run off fats. Fats it's actually a better energy source. So he ends up finding this research, talks to his doctor about it. His doctor's like, I don't think it's going to work. And if it might be too hard anyways to get your kid to do it. And he's like, harder than prescription drugs and surgery and all. He's like, so eventually he's like, fuck it, I'm going to give it a try. He gives it a try. In 3 days, his kid's off every prescription drug, completely cured. And it wasn't a coincidence, because like 2 or 3 years later, his kid gets off the diet for like a day and all the symptoms come back, and then it gets back. So it's obvious that it was because of the diet. And then he goes from a happy parent because he found something to cure his child, to an angry parent, because he's like, I had access to all the best doctors, all the best research, the people who are supposed to have all the best options for me, and even they didn't know about this, or even tell me that this is a alternative that I could even attempt or whatnot. So like that's a perfect example of a guy who had access to the best doctors, the best everything, and yet found a alternative. And then he started this thing called the Charlie Foundation, which was basically just looking into the benefits of the ketogenic diet. And I had Dr. Dominic D'Agostino on. I mean, you can do this for animals who are having violent seizures or whatnot. So it's but it's an example of how like we put these doctors on a pedestal, and he had access to the best doctors, and yet he found an alternative that, people think, if my doctor's not suggesting it, then that alternative must be bullshit. And that's not the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a sad story in a similar way. I wrote an article about this. It was actually called "Death by Malfeasance," and it's a really sad story about a girl named Alyssa Erwin. I don't remember if I'll remember the other lady's name. I'm trying to look it up on my site, but basically this lady, Alyssa Erwin, or she was younger at the time, just came down with brain cancer. And well, rather to start with the other side, this woman in California came down with the exact same brain cancer. All right, they don't know each other, different sides of the country. She's in Oregon. Here it is. I just want to be able to say her name. People can look this up. You can just search "death by malfeasance" on my website. But it's a really sad story. And the woman, her name was Brittany Maynard. She got brain cancer and went through all the rigmarole of Western medicine, and ultimately was told that you have 6 months to live. And decided to take, this was a newly passed law in Oregon at the time, decided to take the what was it called? Basically allowing her to take her own life. because she was about to die, the passionate relief, whatever it's called, and she ended up taking her own life. She was 28 years old. Same time on the other side of the country, Alyssa Erwin had the same exact brain cancer. Guess what she did? Cured it with cannabis oil. Cured it. Went away. About 8 months later, it came back, which happens again, cured it again with the same cannabis oil, right? That's crazy. And the sad reality is that people like Brittany Maynard aren't even aware that there's something alternative to try. And you have to realize that there are plenty of doctors. She probably went through 100 doctors, and I guarantee at some level, one of them in there knew that there was some efficacy to what we're talking about and just chose not to tell her. Not even like, hey, psst, maybe try this because you're going to kill yourself. Like, they allowed someone to take their own life because the system decided that thing's not allowed to be talked about. I mean, I physically felt like I let this person down at this time when I wrote this article, because my focus at the time was a lot about cannabis. And I'm like, I should have, like, I'm not doing enough to show the world that this is something that could be changed. And it's just sickening, So to have something like that is a good story of the same version where these people realized and decided to try something new, didn't have a father that was just only listening to the doctors, but said, you know what, I'm going to try anything. And saved her life effectively. I think Dr. Jordan Peterson's daughter went through a very similar thing. She was on a show about that. And same thing. Every time, the moment she stopped doing it, all came back. Well, it's just so sickening that our doctors or our system allow this to take place, knowing that people are getting sick. It's called Death by Malfeasance, the Gross Negligence of the U.S. Government, just to see full title.
Yeah, it's to hear those stories. It's so sad because, like you said, like, if you're going to take your own life, why not attempt some other things? And there's other things that have had some success. I've had Dr. Thomas Seyfried on my show, who wrote Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. He actually was he has tons of peer-reviewed studies. He sees he does research on the link between preventing and curing cancer with ketogenic diet, because we've known for over 100 years that glucose is the energy source of cancer cells. So it kind of makes logical sense. If you can starve your body of glucose, you can probably starve those cancer cells. So there are some benefits of it. And like when I had him on the show, like, nobody's interested in this research. Nobody's interested in, because there's not a pill. There's not a pill. I remember when I had Dr. Don D'Agostino on, I believe it was when he was on my show, he was talking about how Big Pharma was trying to figure out how to get your body. They wanted to like have the benefits of ketosis without a dietary treatment. Like, in other words, let's try to figure out how to give you a pill that will get you in ketosis so you can get the benefits of it or whatever, if there is medical.
So they can profit from it.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. And that's actually what happened with the John Hopkins research. When Jim Abrams was on my show, the reason why John Hopkins stopped kind of promoting the ketogenic diet is because pharmaceutical companies basically had pills that were having some success, and they're like, hey, how about you recommend this instead of the dietary treatment, and then they basically kind of fell out of I guess promoting that. So
how much you want to bet there's about 11 side effects on that pill, right?
Exactly.
As always. So sickening.
It is, and it's the carnivore diet, the one that Dr. Peterson's daughter does, and so does Dr. Peterson also, I believe, was on the carnivore diet. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, when your body can have, same way that peanut butter or vaccines can have some type of a reaction to your body, anything. I mean, everything from a spice to a preservative that's in a food, like something you're consuming could have some negative effect on your body, your digestive system, whatever, some autoimmune issue or whatever. So the reason why I think the carnivore diet has actually worked, and I actually did it for 3 weeks, just to give it a try, and it was a great, like, just discipline, I guess exercise to see if I could do it, because it is quite boring after after a couple of days. But without a doubt, like, I did feel better. I was leaner. I felt good. My digestive system was awesome, and so it makes sense if you have some autoimmune disease and or some issue and it could be coming from some food, something you're not even aware of, something that 90% of people who eat it have positive effects from it, but for some reason you have a negative effect from it. So if you literally eliminate everything and only consume one thing, beef or just animal products, not even dairy products. I mean, I think they're pretty strict with just like steak almost. It makes sense that whatever's causing those issues could be eliminated, and then you could start adding things in. But even the carnivore diet is looked down upon, even though there's a lot of people who are having success with it. And the way I look at it is, like, just because the research is in there, if people are saying they feel better and it's working, who are we to say that they're full of shit? So I think people should be much more open-minded with all these things. But like with all these things, people pick teams. I mean, you want to talk about religion and politics? I mean, people pick teams with that. But Jesus, they do the same thing with diets? It's like I'm a paleo person or I'm a vegan person or whatever, and those wars happen and people kind of become very, very tribal.
Yeah, so true in every aspect, I think too.
Yeah. Well, I won't hold you up because I know I already went over my time that I told you. But
I was enjoying our conversation, man. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
And can you tell people where they can get your stuff, how they can connect with you, and also hopefully when I do get this roundtable discussion with the Union of the Unwanted, I'd love to get you involved because I think your website's one of those awesome websites, and I think the more people we can get involved with just kind of brainstorming a I guess alternative and a way of kind of bypassing, because I think people are really starting to get fed up more than ever, and we need to do something because the algorithms are obviously, I mean, I'm sure your website, you probably have seen some effects on traffic. I know when I had Russ Baker on like a couple months ago, he was talking about throughout the years why the traffic's been going way down. It's wicked hard to find. Well, now I'm from Massachusetts. It's wicked hard.
I just thought that too.
It's wicked hard to find alternative information and research. I mean, when I first started doing this podcast, it was super easy. Just go online, Google a topic, and I could find a website, your website, Corbett's website, somebody's website that's giving an alternative perspective. Now it's almost impossible. So I think if we can all come together and try to brainstorm a way of kind of bypassing that with a bunch of people that we respect and like in the alternative media, I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Let me know, man. I'd love to take part. And now I'm remembering that you asked me that right in the beginning, and I didn't note on it. That was the whole point. But yeah, no, that would be fantastic, and something I think we all need to try to take part in, do ourselves, and it doesn't, everyone should be doing it. I keep telling people out there the same thing. Go out, start a YouTube channel, start a BitChute channel, go out there and just start saying what you think. We need more of that today. So yeah, absolutely, man. I would love to take part in that. Everybody out there, the lastamericanvagabond.com is the best thing you can go to. From there, you can find everything else, but we're on every other platform. I argue that people should be trying to use the decentralized alternative platforms out there today. I know people are resistant to get rid of YouTube because it's where everybody goes. But, I argue we should if you don't need it. But at the very least, just branch out. Start opening yourself up to new things. So when something happens there, we're not just stuck with nothing. We can go into other platforms. So important. But just search TLA Vagabond on pretty much any damn platform and you'll find us there. But thanks for having me on. And I really enjoyed the talk.
Hey, thanks. And also for people who are listening to this via podcast, you can also get this basically anywhere you can get podcasts, because I know I listen to your show also on Podcast Addict on Android. So
yeah, iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry. Yeah, I mean,
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate the time. Sorry we went a little over, but hopefully we'll reconnect soon, and I'll definitely keep you in the loop in regards to that Swapcast with a bunch of people.
All right, thanks, man.
Awesome. Thanks. Take care, Ryan.
Have a good one.